I found out my apartment had been sold because a stranger tried to unlock my front door. It was a Tuesday, nothing dramatic about it. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, half asleep, coffee going cold on the counter. When the lock rattled, I assumed it was the upstairs neighbor again, drunk and confused. Then the key turned, hard, confident. The handle dipped. I froze. My heart slammed so violently it made me dizzy. I moved fast, faster than I thought I could, yanking the door open before it could open on me. A man stood there with a folder under his arm and a polite, startled smile already forming. "Oh," he said. "Sorry, I thought this was vacant." "Vacant? I live here," I said, my voice too sharp, too loud. He blinked, checked the number on the door, then the papers in his hand. His smile faltered. "This unit was sold last week," he said gently, like he was explaining bad weather. "We're scheduled for inspection today." Something inside my chest collapsed in on itself. "That's not possible." He hesitated. "Are you renting?" "No," I said, "I own it." The word own felt fragile in my mouth, like glass. He apologized again, backing away, murmuring about a mistake. I closed the door with shaking hands and slid down against the wood as if it could hold me upright. Sold. Vacant. Inspection. I sat there for a long time, staring at the scuff mark near the baseboard I'd been meaning to clean for years. My ears rang, my mouth tasted metallic. My phone buzzed in my hand like it had been waiting. A text from Richard. "Call me when you can." 2 weeks earlier, Richard had been sitting at the same kitchen counter, tapping his fingers against the granite like he was counting something invisible. "Family helps family," he'd said. I'd nodded then, smiled, let the words slide over me the way I always did. I learned early how to be agreeable, how to read the temperature of a room before opening my mouth, how to soften my voice so it didn't sound like a challenge. My mother used to call it being mature for my age. What it really meant was learning how not to be a problem. When Richard married my mom, I was 16 and already good at disappearing. He didn't replace my father, he replaced oxygen, quietly, slowly, until you didn't realize how hard it was to breathe. He never yelled, he never hit, he provided, paid bills, fixed things around the house. People praised him constantly. "You're so lucky," they'd say. Lucky felt like a debt. Lila, his daughter, had never learned that word. She moved through life like it owed her something. Loud laugh, easy confidence. She talked about her dreams as if the universe had already agreed. When she announced her engagement, everyone orbiting her snapped into motion like gravity had shifted. The wedding wasn't just a wedding, it was a performance, a declaration, a $100,000 spectacle that grew larger every time someone said, "You deserve this." I stayed quiet during the planning. I always stayed quiet. But something changed after that. Richard started asking questions. Casual at first. "So, you've built up good equity in that place, huh? Real estate's wild right now. You ever think about moving?" I felt it then, the faint, creeping unease, like hearing footsteps behind you but telling yourself it's nothing. My mom started avoiding specifics. "Things are expensive these days," she said one night, folding laundry that didn't need folding. "We all have to pitch in somehow." "For what?" I asked. She smiled too quickly. "Life." Lila, meanwhile, stopped pretending. "You don't really need all that space," she said once, sipping wine on my couch. "Just you. Just you." As if that made me smaller, as if that made what I'd built negotiable. The apartment had been my escape hatch, my proof. I bought it after years of working myself hollow, early mornings, late nights, missed holidays. I remember the day I signed the papers. My hands had shaken so badly the agent asked if I needed water. My name was the only one on the deed. I checked it 3 times back then, just to be sure. So when Richard asked for copies of my documents for insurance purposes, I hesitated. "I'll handle my own paperwork," I said. He smiled, tight, controlled. "Of course," he replied, "just trying to help." That smile stayed with me long after he left. It always meant something. After the stranger at my door left, I called Richard. He answered on the second ring. "You found out," he said calmly. I gripped the phone so hard my fingers hurt. "Found out what?" I asked. A pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "The apartment was sold," he said calmly. "We assumed you'd be upset." "Assumed? You sold my home." The words sounded unreal. "How?" "You weren't responding to reason," he replied, "and time was sensitive." I couldn't breathe. "You had no right." "We're family," he said, his voice firm now, "and families make decisions together." "No," I whispered. "You made a decision for me." Another pause. "You'll understand eventually," he said. "It was for Lila's wedding." There it was, the thing they'd been circling like sharks. I hung up without saying goodbye. My phone lit up immediately, my mother this time. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling. "Did you know?" I asked. Silence. That silence was louder than anything Richard had said. I ended the call and stood in the middle of my living room looking at the walls I'd painted myself, the couch I'd hauled up 3 flights of stairs, the life I'd assembled piece by piece. They'd already decided who I was, the reliable one, the flexible one, the one who would understand. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was that understanding didn't mean surrender, and that while they'd been planning a wedding, I'd been building something far more solid than their assumptions. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my couch with the lights on, shoes still on my feet, listening to the building breathe around me, the pipes knocking, the elevator whining, the distant sound of traffic bleeding in through the alley-facing windows. Every sound felt intrusive, like the apartment already knew it was being taken from me and was preparing to forget me. By morning, my body felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped out and replaced with static. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Then I started making calls. The realtor's office confirmed it first, cautiously, like they were afraid I might shatter through the phone. Yes, the unit had been sold. Yes, paperwork finalized. Yes, signatures obtained. When I asked whose signatures, the woman hesitated. "Your stepfather acted under power of attorney," she said. "We assumed." "There is no power of attorney," I said. Silence. "I'm sorry," she replied, her voice changing. "That's what we were given." Something cold settled deep in my gut. Not panic, clarity. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd forged one. I hung up and sat very still, my mind flicking backward through every conversation, every moment of discomfort I'd swallowed, every time I doubted myself instead of them. This wasn't impulsive, it was planned. The family meeting happened that evening. They chose my mother's house, like neutral ground would soften what they'd done, like the familiar smell of her cooking and the photos on the walls, birthdays, graduations, moments where we all looked like a family could dilute the truth. Richard sat in his usual chair, hands folded, posture relaxed. Lila paced near the window, phone glued to her hand, already irritated. My mom hovered between us, wringing her fingers. "You should have told me you were coming," she said softly. "I didn't want to give you time to rehearse." The room went quiet. Richard cleared his throat. "Let's stay calm." That was his favorite phrase, the one he used whenever someone else's emotions threatened his control. "Explain it. Explain how you sold a property that isn't yours." Lila scoffed. "God, you're being dramatic." I turned to her. "You knew?" She shrugged. "It's not like you were going to be homeless. You make good money." My chest tightened. "That's not the point." "It kind of is," she snapped. "You're alone. You don't even want kids. What do you need a 2-bedroom for?" "Just you." Again. Richard raised his hand, cutting her off, not in defense of me, but to keep order. "We didn't steal anything," he said calmly. "The apartment was purchased while you were living under our roof, with support." "That's a lie," I said. My mother flinched. "I paid every cent myself. I have the records." "You lived rent-free for years," Richard replied. "That's support." "I was a teenager. That's parenting." His jaw tightened. There it was, that flicker of irritation he tried so hard to hide. "We provided stability, opportunities." "You provided control," the words slipped out before I could stop them. My mother gasped softly. "Honey." "No," I said, my voice shaking now. "Let me finish." My hands were trembling, but something else was rising underneath the fear. Anger, clean and sharp. "You decided my life was expendable because it was convenient, because I wouldn't make a scene." Lila crossed her arms. "You're acting like we murdered someone." Richard leaned forward. "Lower your voice." I laughed then. I couldn't help it. A broken, humorless sound. "You forged documents. That's a felony." The room froze. My mother's face drained of color. "Richard?" He didn't look at her. "That's an accusation." "It's a fact," I replied. "There is no power of attorney. You never had legal authority." Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Finally, my mother whispered, "Is that true?" Richard exhaled slowly, like he was the one being wronged. "We did what was necessary. Time was tight. Deposits were due." "For a wedding," I said. "For family," he corrected. Lila's voice softened then, turning syrupy. "You could have said yes, you know. We wouldn't have had to do it this way." Something inside me snapped. "So this is my fault now?" I asked. "No one's blaming you," my mother said quickly. "You all are," I said. "You just don't want to say it out loud." I looked at her then. Really looked. The way she couldn't meet my eyes. The way her shoulders slumped, like she'd already accepted this version of events. She chose silence. Again. That hurt more than Richard ever could. I left before I broke. In the car, my hands shook so badly I had to pull over. I screamed into the steering wheel, a sound ripped from somewhere deep and old, the kind that doesn't come from the throat, but from the bones. I thought of every time I'd swallowed discomfort to keep the peace, every holiday I'd spent feeling like a guest in my own family, every time I'd told myself they mean well. They meant convenience. That night, I slept on my friend Maya's couch, curled in on myself like a child. She didn't ask questions, just handed me water and let me cry until my chest ached. The next morning, I called a lawyer. By the afternoon, the truth was undeniable. The sale was invalid. The deed, my deed, was ironclad, recorded, uncontested, unambiguous. My name, alone. What Richard had done wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. The lawyer asked me if I wanted to press charges. I didn't answer right away. I thought of my mother's face, Lila's wedding dress, the way Richard always spoke about reputation, about appearances. No, I said finally, not yet. There are different kinds of justice. Some of them need an audience. The wedding was in 6 days. 6 days of silence from my family. No apologies, no explanations, just a single text from my mother. We hope you'll come. This is still your family. I stared at the message for a long time. Family. The word felt strange now, hollowed out, rewritten. I typed back one word. Okay. That night, I pulled the deed from my safe. The paper felt heavier than it should have, solid, undeniable. For years, I'd been taught to doubt myself, to shrink, to make room. They'd mistaken that for weakness. I slid the document into a folder and placed it carefully in my bag. If they wanted a wedding to remember, I would give them one. The venue looked like a lie, polished until it shined. White roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers dripping light like expensive tears, soft music floating through the air, violins stretched thin with sentiment. Everything screamed perfect, the kind of perfect that costs more than some people make in a year and still manages to feel empty. I arrived early. Not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to see them before the masks fully settled into place. The parking lot was already buzzing. Coordinators with headsets, bridesmaids in silk robes laughing too loud. I sat in my car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of the folder in my bag. The leather strap pressed into my shoulder like a reminder. This is real. You're not imagining it. For a second, the old instinct kicked in, the urge to turn around, to spare everyone the discomfort, to absorb the damage quietly and disappear. That instinct had ruled my life. I shut the car door instead. Inside, the air smelled like flowers and hairspray and money. I spotted my mother first. She stood near the mirrors, watching Leela get fitted into her final dress, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked older than I remembered. When she saw me, her face flickered. Relief, fear, guilt, all tangled together. "You came," she said. "I said I would." She reached for me, then stopped herself. "I'm glad." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Leela turned, radiant and sharp all at once. The dress hugged her perfectly. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a magazine spread titled Deserving. Her eyes dropped to my bag. "You're late." "I'm early." She smiled thinly. "Same difference." Richard appeared behind her, immaculate in his suit, the picture of composed authority. When he saw me, his expression didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. He hadn't expected me to show up calm. "Let's not do this today," he said quietly, stepping closer. "I'm not doing anything. I'm here for the wedding." "For once," Leela muttered. My mother flinched. "Leela." Richard raised a hand. "Enough." He looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to assess the damage. "We can talk after." "No," I said gently. "We can't." Something in my tone made him pause. I walked away before he could respond, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like I was walking towards something inevitable. The venue was held outdoors, under a canopy of white fabric that billowed in the breeze. Guests filled the rows, dressed in muted colors, murmuring admiration. I sat near the aisle, close enough to see everything. As the music swelled, Leela appeared at the end of the aisle. Everyone stood. She was beautiful, truly, radiant with anticipation, with certainty. I watched her face, so sure the world would bend toward her, so confident it always had. Richard walked her down the aisle. My chest tightened. He looked proud, accomplished, like he'd delivered something valuable. When he handed her off, he kissed her cheek and whispered something that made her smile. I wondered if he felt powerful. The vows blurred together, promises of forever, of honesty, of partnership. I felt strangely calm. The reception was louder, glasses clinking, laughter spilling over, 1,000 tiny conversations about centerpieces and honeymoons and how worth it everything was. Richard gave a speech. He talked about sacrifice, about providing, about family pulling together for something bigger than themselves. Applause thundered. I felt it in my bones. Then Leela took the microphone. She laughed, dabbed at her eyes, thanked her father for making everything possible. Her gaze flicked toward me for a half-second, just long enough. That was my cue. I stood. The room didn't notice at first. People were still clapping, smiling, leaning into each other. I stepped forward, moving toward the front where the microphone rested. Richard saw me then. His smile froze. I reached the mic just as the applause faded. "I'm sorry," I said into the silence, my voice steady, amplified. "I won't take long." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Leela stared at me. "What are you doing?" "I'm family," I said. "Right?" A few nervous laughs followed. Richard stepped toward me. "This is not appropriate." "Neither is selling property you don't own," I replied. The room went still. My mother gasped. "I didn't want to do this," I continued, my heart pounding but my voice clear. I begged for honesty. I waited for someone, anyone, to do the right thing. I turned toward Richard. "You sold my apartment. You forged documents. You committed fraud to pay for this wedding." Leela shook her head, laughing sharply. "This is insane." I opened my bag and pulled out the folder. The sound of paper sliding free felt deafening. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the deed. My deed. Recorded. Verified. Mine." Whispers erupted. Richard's face went pale. "You don't understand," he said quickly, reaching for the mic. I stepped back, out of reach. "There is no power of attorney," I said. "There never was. The sale is invalid. The money you spent, every dollar, was obtained illegally." My mother looked like she might collapse. Leela's voice rose, shrill. "You're lying." I met her eyes. "Call the lawyer." Silence swallowed the space between us. Someone near the back coughed. Richard's authority cracked then, just a fracture, but visible. "We can discuss this privately." "No," I said softly. "You decided this didn't need my consent, so now it doesn't need your privacy." The weight of it settled over the room. People avoided eye contact. A few stared openly, curiosity warring with discomfort. The illusion, the beautiful, expensive illusion, began to peel. "I didn't want revenge," I said. "I wanted respect. I wanted to be seen." I looked at my mother. "You taught me to be quiet, to be grateful, to not cause trouble." Her eyes filled with tears. "And you," I turned back to Richard, "taught me that control dressed up as care is still control." He said nothing. I placed the deed gently on the table beside the cake. "I'll be pursuing legal action after today." Then I stepped back. No applause followed this time. I walked down the aisle alone. Behind me, the music didn't resume. Outside, the sun was blinding. I inhaled deeply, my lungs filling with air that felt new. My hands were shaking now, but it was the kind of shaking that comes after release, not fear. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Please, we need to talk." I didn't answer. I got in my car and drove away, the sound of laughter and violins fading behind me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt done. The quiet afterward was louder than the confrontation. For days, my phone stayed face down on the kitchen counter, vibrating itself to exhaustion. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that shifted tone like weather, anger, pleading, confusion, denial. I didn't listen to any of them at first. I needed the silence to settle, to prove to myself that the world wouldn't end if I stopped responding. It didn't. The lawyer moved quickly, faster than I expected. Paperwork, court filings, official letters that spoke in cold, precise language, fraudulent representation, unauthorized sale, restitution. Words that had weight, consequences that didn't care about family titles or intentions. The sale was reversed within weeks. The buyers were furious. The realtor's office went quiet. Richard's name began to circulate in spaces he'd always controlled, now stripped of context and charm. Reputation, I learned, is a fragile thing once it's exposed to light. My apartment came back to me on paper before it came back to me emotionally. The first night I returned alone, I stood in the doorway and didn't move. Everything looked the same, the couch, the windows, the scuffed baseboard near the hall, but it felt different, like a place that had been broken into and put back together again, familiar but no longer innocent. I sat on the floor and cried until my ribs ached, not because I'd won, because I finally understood what I'd lost. My mother showed up unannounced one afternoon, a week later. I saw her car from the balcony and felt something twist low in my stomach, an old reflex, the urge to prepare myself, to soften, to make room. I didn't. When I opened the door, she looked smaller, folded inward, like gravity had finally reached her. "I won't stay long," she said quickly. "That's up to you," I replied, stepping aside. She stood in the living room, hands clasped, eyes darting around like she was afraid the walls might accuse her. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't think he'd... "You knew enough," I said gently. She flinched. "I was scared," she whispered. "I thought if I pushed back, everything would fall apart." I sat across from her. "It already had." She nodded, tears spilling now. "I failed you." The words hung there, heavy, overdue. "I spent my whole life trying to earn your protection, and you taught me to survive without it." She reached for my hand. I let her, but it felt distant, like touching a memory instead of a person. "He's not speaking to me," she said. "Lila barely does." I didn't feel relief or vindication, just clarity. "That's between you and them," I said. Her face crumpled. "Can we fix this?" I looked around the apartment, the home I'd built alone, defended alone. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't know what there is to fix." She left an hour later. We hugged, briefly, awkwardly. When the door closed behind her, I didn't feel empty. I felt steady. Richard never apologized. He sent one email, formal, defensive, written like a man who still believed he was misunderstood rather than wrong. I acted in what I believed were the family's best interests. I didn't reply. Lila sent nothing at all. The wedding photos appeared online weeks later, cropped carefully, smiles forced just enough to pass. The comments were polite, muted. The story had spread, even if no one said it outright. I was missing from every frame. That felt intentional. That felt defeat. The strangest part was the grief that came later. Not for them, but for the version of myself that believed love was something you earned by disappearing. For the girl who learned to be grateful instead of safe. For the woman who thought loyalty meant endurance. I started therapy. I learned new language, boundaries, autonomy, consent. I learned that betrayal doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like entitlement dressed up as concern. And that silence, when it matters most, is a decision. Months passed. I repainted the living room, donated furniture that carried too much memory, opened the windows more often, let the space breathe. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the alley lights flicker on, and realized something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting. I was free. The final contact came on a quiet Sunday morning, a letter, handwritten, from Richard. It was short, no excuses this time, no justifications, just a careful accounting of loss, his marriage strained, his relationship with Lila brittle, his standing damaged beyond repair. "I underestimated you," he wrote, "and I paid for it." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Family, I learned, isn't proven by blood or sacrifice or silence. It's proven by who respects your boundaries when it costs them something. They underestimated me because I was quiet. They mistook patience for permission. They thought the girl who didn't fight back wouldn't know how to stand. They were wrong. I locked the drawer, turned off the lights, and went to bed in my apartment, my home, knowing that nothing I built would ever belong to someone else again. Not my space, not my voice, not my life. And that was the real victory.